Right, here we go then, me back. I've just made myself a nice cup of tea. So we're ready to rock on part 9. And this is the last real core part, really. This part 9, because part 10, 11 and 12, we're going to put everything we've done into practice in them last 3 parts, where we're going to model, rig, animate, render, light the cop and robber scene. So yeah, this is the last core part, and this is going to be lighting and rendering. So let's just make sure I've got everything set up. There's my epic pin. Screencast. Let's put that on so you can see what I'm doing down there. And what we'll do, we'll go through some of the lighting fundamentals and rendering fundamentals in this one. So here's our cube. Yeah, we've got our wireframe. So let's start then. Lighting introduction. So there's a lot of films and games out there in the world, and these days the hyper-realism of everything, you know, they really go to town on the lighting on some of these films and games today. And in the real film industry, they're known as gaffers, the people who set up lights, the lighting leads, you know, trying to light scenes in a creative way, and you know, to try and get a certain mood, I guess, basically. You know, you might have a horror film, for example. Well, you'd want minimal sort of eerie lighting there in a horror film, where you could have, like, you know, a street scene. There's all kinds of scenes, really. It depends on what you're trying to light, really, but we're obviously just going into the basics on Blender. And lighting, it gives us a way of seeing our model, apart from just looking at it in a 3D viewport. Basically, I mean, if you've created an animation, a model, you might want a set of images, or just a single image, and they need to be rendered out, either saved and then composited together to create like a short movie, or, you know, Instagram post, that kind of stuff. And there's various options available in Blender with regards to lights, which we're going to go into in a minute. And obviously lights in 3D, they'll create shadows to make things look more natural and create depth in a scene. So you might have, say if you've got a light source, for example a spotlight here. Well, if that light is hitting this cube there, you're going to get a kind of shadow. So yeah, lighting's all about setting up lights and creating a nice depth to a scene. And you can have soft shadows, hard shadows. You can change the colour of the lights. You can have multiple lights in a scene. You can even have like sunlight. So yeah, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve, really. But there's 4 light types in Blender, and you can add a light, and you've got point, sun, spot and area, and there are your 4 main light sources for Blender. But there's obviously other ways of doing it, but that's your main 4 kind of light sources, that is. Let's just have a swig of tea. I can't beat a cup of tea. Tea and water, best 2 drinks if you ask me. So yeah, these lights, they'll act, they try and mimic real world behaviour, really. And that's what you want to aim for, is try and mimic reality. And what we're going to do, we'll go into the basics of rendering, I think, before we before we go into adding any of these lights. So let's just discuss the quick basics of rendering. So rendering is a process of generating an image or a sequence of images. It's known as CGI, a computer generated image. So in 3D we'll set up lights and cameras, and generally you'll finish the modelling, rigging and animating and texturing first. And after you've done that, you'll set up your lights and cameras. It's a pipeline to 3D. And obviously on this beginning Blender series, we've gone through the steps, what you do in general, down the pipeline. And with CGI rendering, it can take many forms as well, stylised, hyper-realistic, cartoony, mix of the two. So it all depends on the requirements. I mean, I'm working on a short film at the minute and I want it sort of a toon shader, which is kind of flat, really. It gives like a cartoony effect. So it all depends on what you're trying to render, really, and the style you're going for. And with rendering, you can render a single image, sequence of images. You can render it as a video. I mean, a sequence of images, you'll have like 24 frames per second. Then you'll have like 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on. So each of those frames makes up your 1 second. So you can imagine, I mean, my first short film I'm working on is going to be about 2.5 minutes. So you're looking at a lot of render time, really, when it's 24 frames for 1 second. So you're looking at, if my maths is correct, 1440 frames just for 1 minute of animation. So it can get quite complex, really, with rendering and 3D work. And the more powerful your PC is, the quicker you can process these renders. I mean, I remember learning at university 20 odd years ago that some of Pixar's animations can take up to 90 hours to render a single frame, believe it or not, and some of these ILM films. I mean, it's just insane, really. So you've always got to check, for example, if you're rendering something that's taking hours. One thing I've learnt over time, just had a plane there and scale it. Make sure everything's nice and flat on the surface. For example, if you was rendering out a complex animation and you notice afterwards that there's a gap in between, say, a table and something there, well, you've got to re-render it all. So it's always best to do some brief render tests first, at lower frames, for example. Make sure everything's in place, really, before you render stuff. Control A, all transforms to deltas. So yeah, I mean, a render engine. So in Blender, you've got, if you go up to here to our render properties, render properties, you'll see there you've got a render engine, which you've got Eevee, Workbench and Cycles. Generally, a lot of people use Cycles and they love Cycles, and that's all I use, to be honest. Workbench, I think, is more of a what do you call it, architecture kind of rendering. Eevee's decent, but Cycles is the one you want to use, really. More realistic, better light calculation. Yeah, go for Cycles. Obviously, you can use whatever you want, but I say Cycles is your best one. It's known as a ray tracer. Cycles basically traces the path of each light source, that means, to produce more realistic results. And when you're working with lights in Blender, you'll want to switch to your lit, which is there on your viewport. So you've got your basic see-through, grayscale, material preview mode, that's fully rendered. So that's any of these lights. You'll see it in your viewport. We're going to go into them in a minute. So let's just show before we go into them, or let's just show a very simple lighting setup. So let's add another plane here. And you can clearly see there that the shadow's being cast when we're in lit mode to show that there's a light in the scene. And if we go to animation, let's go to T to get our tool up, N to get our items, move this camera. So view, cameras. You can see that when you move that camera in your viewport, as I said in the intro, I think in the basic UI tutorial of part 1, when you move that camera in your viewport, it's moving in your other 3D viewport, your camera view. And then yeah, what you can do generally is what I like to do, either grey in this one or material preview. Then you can have that one as your lighting. Then you can really see what's happening more in your camera and lit view. Moving the light, shadow moves. And then once you've got a light in your scene, you can go to your light properties there. And you can change that, for example, to a spotlight. Let's just go to our camera settings and we'll change it to a 1K square or 1080 by 1080 pixels, so it's just square. And if we go to local and move, you can see that's like a spotlight. Now, like you'll see on stage, for example, for actors, there's a simple spotlight. And if you go to your light settings, I believe is it radius, we'll go into that in a bit. It's the size I was looking for, so you can bring your size down. Have your light there. And there's your spotlight. Just creating a light on the cube. Move your size down to create a kind of circle. So you're mimicking reality, aren't you there? There's your power. Change that to 500. Power goes lower. That's just a visual thing showing the cone. Just to give you an idea of how it can fall off of the light. So that's a very basic light setup, and be sure to download the PDF, tons of information in there. Yeah, a lot of info in that, so download that PDF. Power is your watts. Wattage, how much power the light's going to give off. And as I said, if you hit F12, That's going to render what's in your viewport and your camera. And you can obviously go to render image. If you want to render an animation, that's if you've got your timeline with different cuts, so that'd render. At the moment, it'll just render 250 of the same frames, which is pretty boring, obviously, but if you've got animation in there, you'd want to render the animation, not just a single image. And then, when you've rendered your image, you get different slots as well, so you can compare it from before. So there's your slot 1. If you now go to slot 2, let's just decrease the power so it's really low. It's probably a bit too low. Let's put it as 400. It's F12. Now you can see that the power at 1000 is like that. The power at 400 is like that, so you can compare it. And if you chose, for example, say slot 3, increase the power to 2000 and it's F12, and you've got 1000, 400 and 2000. So that's the difference between 2000 watt and 1000 watt. Yep, so it's all to do with power. You can change the colour as well. So that's a very basic lighting setup, but let's obviously go into more depth with this. So you're not going to be just lighting a simple cube, but we have to show the basics. And we're going to light the Minecraft character towards the end, do a simple light setup on that. So let's look into different lights then, and how we go about it. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of it's to do with the mood you're looking for. And remember that trusty old phrase in film, lights, camera, action. And that's what you want to be thinking about when you're setting up your scenes and your short films and whatever you want to render out, your animations. Think of lights, camera, action. So in a default Blender scene, when it opens, you're presented with a point light. I'll change it to a spot just to show this. But if you go to a point light, let's go into global. So we move it easier. There's a point light. And basically this light dissipates as it moves further away from the source, which is known as a fall off. So if we move it closer to the cube, you'll light the cube more. Remember to rotate around depending on where you want your lights. So it's quite intense there, isn't it? You can see. If you move it up, it becomes less intense. If you move it over here, this light, there's your source, it's going to shine in all directions, but the further it goes, the light fades. So it can be bright there, further it goes it'll just fade to nothing. And that's basically a point light for you, that is. But let's have a look at the properties involved in this point light. There you can see it moving about. Where should we put that? Never know where to put this epic pen. Put it there. So there's our light. As I say, light properties there. This is very important, this radius. The more you increase this radius, let's put it that way so you can see the shadow coming outwards. If this radius is 0.1 or 0, you've got a sharp shadow there. Very sharp shadow. See how sharp the line is. If you increase this radius to 2, the shadows become a lot softer. If you keep increasing this radius, say to 5, you get softer shadows. And generally that's more aesthetically pleasing, softer shadows. It's what you want to be aiming for. You don't really want harsh shadows. In general, sometimes you might, but in general you want some nice soft shadows, and your radius does that. Just put it 1 for now, so they're sharp, quite sharp really. I think 1's the default. Yeah, that increases the sharpness. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong thing. You can key stuff as well, so you might want it sharp and soft. Brilliant thing about Blender, you can just key stuff there, so animate it. And this, so yeah, sorry, I was looking at use nodes. You can use, there's an option for use nodes as well, which gives you like more properties basically in the shading editor. We'll look into that in a bit. So that's your basic point, like sun. Well, what's the sun then? Well, it is what it is, it's the sun. There's various, let's go into flip mode. And the sun has also got, similar to your wattage, your strength. Gives really powerful lighting, the sun does. I mean, look at that, the strength's 1. But even just bumping it up to 5, you can really see the power there. So it acts like the sun. The sunlight does. The sun, excuse the pun. Excuse me, I'm nuts. So yeah, you can change the colour as well. Obviously it's more of a yellow tinge, isn't it, the sun? So if you make that yellow, and you're giving like a burnt out look of the sun, aren't you? You have that as 100. That's really burnt out, isn't it? Let's just put it as 10, set it to yellowy white. Changes the angle, the rotation of the sun. You can have shadows or you can't have shadows. Good thing about Blender, there's not a lot of confusing settings in the lights. It's quite user friendly. So that's your sun. Next one's the spot, which we looked into. I think we looked into that when I was quickly showing it, wasn't I? So if you go to Shift T, it lets you move the light target around. That's a good little tip there. Shift T, and that lets you aim the light where you want it. So rotate around, Shift T onto your cube, go to that view, Shift T. You can obviously move it in your rotation there. Auto key off. That's how you want it really, auto key off. And obviously we can't see anything there. If we increase the power to 500, then we can start seeing stuff. Let's have the colour as like a bluish colour. Change that to 1200. And you've got a bit of a, I don't know, you're mimicking kind of a little bit of a moonlight, aren't you, there with a bluish colour. Move that up again. Yeah, and as I say, you got size for your cone. You can imagine that on stage, can't you? Like, then your radius again. Which, as I say, I'll give you softer shadows, your radius. And I believe you can you scale it? Scaling it as well, the light, gives you your softer shadows as well. But I prefer to not confuse myself and just use a radius personally. So that's a basic spotlight which behaves how you'd imagine it would really. Blend, that's it, blend's important as well. It doesn't give, it's the harshness of the light. See, it's sharp. Sharp around there. Increase your blend. It's not as sharp. Blurs the actual light. That does. So yeah, that's your spotlight. But the most popular one, to be honest, what a lot of people use, especially for 3-point lighting, which we'll go into in a bit, is your area light. So let's switch that to an area light. So increase that size to say 3. That's like the radius, I believe, the size on an area light. So if you go to 0.2, you've got sharp. If you go to 5, you go 5, less sharp shadows. And I've been naughty for half hour. Let's go to save as. Part 9C. And what I'll probably do, I might put this, put all these online. So you can kind of reverse engineer it. And look at all these scenes. So yeah, Shift T. And you've moved that along a bit. So an area like, yes, size is similar to your radius. You can change it to like disc, square. I generally like to keep it as square or rectangle. If you want shadow or not, obviously you want shadow. The realism. Again, you got the same kind of thing. Increase the power. Power goes higher. So you could move that there and just have it aiming purely downwards there on the cube. Which, if you're keeping things simple, a lot of people do that. They'll just get the light there, aim it down on the cube, F12 render, and render whatever they're trying to render if they're just doing basic concept work. So that's the 4 kind of lights in Blender. As I say, area light. Probably the most used, really, your area light. Spot. Area, point and sun. There's your various settings. As I say, colour. Have warmer colours over this side, orangey yellow, or cold colours, your blues. So that's your 4 basic lights: point, sun, spot and area. But what other ways of lighting scenes are there? Well, there's more. And one of the techniques is known as HDRI, and that means a high dynamic range image. So let's turn that light off. and don't have it in the camera either. And HDRI, it can be downloaded from places such as, I believe it's called Polyhaven, to get them for free. That's a decent site for an HDRI. And it kind of mimics a real world scene, such as a workshop or a street light. Lights on a street or a house, office, anything like that. Really powerful. So I'll just quickly show you that as well. So if you go to your world properties, actually, let's go to shading, and if you go to world, you'll see you've got already in the scene, already set up, you've got a background node there into your world output. So you've got your object, which sets up your materials. This is in your shader editor. If you go to world, that's your world shader. And you can dial the strength up or down. So let's go to lit, remember. And that gives you the background strength of your world. Generally, a lot of people, lighting artists I've worked with in the past, I don't like to have the strength as 1. They'll do something like 0.3, for example, so they've got a little bit of light in the background. It's not a lot and you can't see much, but then that's when you start setting your lights up, which we've turned off at the minute. So yeah, let's just leave it at 1 for now. So it was on HDRIs, wasn't we? But what you do, if you drag a node out there and go to, I believe it's environment texture, is it? Yeah, and go to open. That's what I got from Polyhaven, that is. So open, downloads, Germantown Street, 4K, open. So now, this cube and this plane is being lit by this Germantown Street. And that's the kind of thing you'll get on Polyhaven. Anything and everything. That's just a random street in Germany. And you've plugged that node into your background. You can adjust the strength. So you could use 0.3 of this environment and then start setting your lights up. Very powerful HDRIs. And if you go to Control T, you've got your mapping nodes as well. Not sure if scale actually affects anything there, but you can rotate it around depending on what you want to achieve. So yeah, that's your HDRI in your world shader properties. So that's another way. So you got your 4 lights, HDR, that's 5 methods. Let's go back to animation, for example. Let's cut that for now. So control right click and you've cut it. And let's just go back to strength 1. Another method, which I haven't really looked into much myself, but if we go to there and go IES, is it light? IES texture. You can download files. I think it's called the IES library. And that, I haven't got any available at the minute, but you can plug that into there. It's like a text file. And it mimics real world lighting. And that's another way of lighting your scene. That's the 6th method. An IES texture, just Google it. IES texture blender, and I'll give you another method. There's another way as well, which is through an emission shader. You could use that to light your scene. So let's go back to our animation. Gotta have a swig of water, bear with me. So we've got our cube. Let's go to Add, Mesh, Sphere. Let's scale that down. Let's come out of lit mode for a bit so we can see what we're doing. Let's move that to there. Scale that down a bit more. Let's Shift D on X. Move that to there. Not gonna. Well, I can't help it myself. Well, always best to work cleanly. So, if we go to lit and F12, you can't really see much, can we, at all? And if we go back into shading and knock that strength down to 0, and it's F12, then it's pitch black, because we've got no lights in the scene whatsoever, have we? But what we can do, if we go into material, and we add just a basic material, just call it sphere. That's our basic BSDF shade, you know, with all our roughness and things like that. Let's go down to emission here. If we set our strength to 0.2 and it's F12, well now, these two spheres are being used to light the scene. Let's just bump that up to 1 and it's F12. Okay, that's pretty cool, that, isn't it? That's got your two spheres there. They're the only sources of light, and they're being used to light this scene. So if you add some more lights, you can add more, obviously, light to it, but that's like a more of a sort of a horror setup, wouldn't it, that? And that's going to be really bright now, 65. You can see what I'm trying to do. I'm using these two spheres with an emissive material to light the scene. Let's just set it to 5 and it's F12. I like that, pretty cool, that, isn't it? Light shining down and just dissipating. Obviously it's what you'd expect, isn't it, that? You'd expect the light source to be bright there, shining down. Yeah, this plane there, you can't see anything really because the light is going straight up and it's blocking the light from coming around the back. It's black around there, it's dark. Same with this plane, it's giving a little bit of light to see, but then just blackness back here, and your light's just falling off along here. Really cool, that is. And that's how you use an emission material to light a scene. Obviously, in general, you don't use just that. You'll use all your different lights. Mainly area lights, as I say, but this can bump it up by adding a bit of an emission. So that's basically the bulk of the techniques for lights. There is actually another one as well, though. I'll just show you while we're at it. And that's if I remember rightly, if you go into your world properties, if you go to colour, sky texture, that adds in a sky texture node there. And let's hide our spheres there. And world properties, sky texture. I believe it's in cycles. Obviously we need to go into shading and set our background strength to, let's just say 1 for now. And that's the sky texture, that is. Let's have the sun intensity at say 0.2. Elevation. Is it elevation? There's a few settings in this. I haven't used it very often. So just bear with me a second. Let's have that as 0.2. Altitude. Sun elevation. Just get my mouse. I believe you can see. Set back to 0.5. Sun intensity 1. Elevation. Oh, that's the way. So elevation gives you like your sunrise. That was what I was looking for. Sun elevation. You can see the sun there as if it was coming over an horizon. Quite useful, as I say, I haven't really used it too much myself. But you can see the elevation of the sun there, and it's mimicking the sunrise. Disk size, sun size, yeah. Intensity. Obviously, if you go to 0, it's nothing. It's kind of like the sun's off, as it were. Rotation, as it rotates around, different angles of the sun. So yeah, that's another way of lighting a scene. Let's just hit F12 out of interest. So he's kind of getting some light there, isn't it, in your shadow? So yeah, that's another one. Sky texture. So there's quite a lot of methods there for lighting your scene. So let's look into kind of a real world example, as it were. Let's hide our cube there. And what we'll do, we'll go to File. I think we'll go to File New for this. Start a fresh scene, so we've got fresh lights and everything in. What we'll do, we'll go to File, Append. Let's find our beginning Blender, Blender files, Part 5 animation. Or was it part? Actually, I think we want part 8B, isn't it? collection. That's it, Minecraft character from the last lesson. So there's our Minecraft character. Serial preview, there he is, Alex. I think the end was 99, wasn't it, if I remember right. Just have a swig of water. So let's just discuss how we go about lighting this one then. Well, let's go into animation. Let's discuss a few render settings. So we haven't really looked into that. There's our render properties. There. Render properties. In your properties. Let's choose cycles. Device. You want a GPU compute on that. You go to Edit Preferences. System. You want to select your graphics card there. And that's a far better way than using CPU. It uses your graphics card to render more faster. Much better at processing. Obviously, the better graphics card you've got, the quicker it'll render, and the quicker your viewports will act when you're in lit mode. So remember that you want at least an 8GB card, really. I mean, Blender works with a 2GB card, but you want an 8GB one. A lot of people use 16 or 24 or more graphics card up to 32. Depends on how much power you want. So yeah, enable your GPU compute. What other settings are in this render properties then? When you got your sampling, the more samples you've got there means the less noise you'll get and the higher quality of a render you'll get. And basically sampling is a number of light bounces and light calculations throughout the scene. As I said, higher samples lead to a less noisy image, but there is a trade-off there. It takes more time to render. You have to find an happy medium, really. What else is in here? Denoise. Generally you want to check that. Gets rid of the noise, the pixelation in your scene. So, cycles, generally the most used one. You want GPU compute. You want to denoise it. Samples, as I say, higher the better. There's a trade-off, takes more time. So you need to play around with that when you're doing the tests and lighting stuff, which we'll go into in a bit, or pretty soon. There's also, that's the main things in your render properties. You've also got your output properties. So if you wanted this for, I don't know, Instagram, is it? Yeah, it's that kind of portrait mode, isn't it? Yeah. That's your camera settings. 24 FPS film, start and end frames, and that's your output there. If you go to FFmpeg, that's a video output, or you want a series of PNGs, for example, high quality PNGs. So that's your output properties, how you're going to output your single image or your animation. And like I say, 24 FPS is the standard for film. So 24 frames times 60 seconds, that's 1440 frames per minute of animation. So a lot of stuff to render depending on what you're looking to do. But what you'll need to do then is you'll need to set up your camera. So we want to light this Minecraft character, don't we? So let's get our camera there. let's just snap to a front. Let's go to, remember you can, oh no, shift T is with your lights, isn't it? So you just move your camera to where you want it to look. Does that camera seem a bit? Not sure if that camera seems a bit squashed tonight. Add camera. That's a sign. Just undo that. So, focal length. That's the camera setting. A lot of stuff to do with cameras is focal length and your depth of field. So when you've set a camera up, you'll get a tab there changing your focal length. 35 to 50 is the main used focal length for cameras, really. The human eye sees most things at approximately 50mm focal length. And there's 35mm. Between 35 and 50 apparently the human eye sees things at. And really your camera, it's something, it's in film, it's something that has an exposure triangle, which is like your aperture, shutter speed and ISO. I'll add a bit more info to that in the description in the PDF. As I say, depth of field, focal length, things like that. You can have like distorted perspective as well and Dutch angles. There's a lot to do, lot in this lesson to learn about things. I'm just touching on the basics. So let's carry on setting this lighting up then for this character. So what we want to do then, we want to hide our cube there. Let's move this over to there and just bring this in a bit. And what we'll do, we'll set up something that's known as an infinite plane. So you've got, you add a plane, you'll go into edit mode, select an edge there, extrude that, move that up. Known as a bent plane or an infinite plane. If you go to Control B, bevel that edge, swivel your middle mouse. That's created like a bent plane now, which is known as an infinite background. Which is what a lot of people use for lighting. Items, simple or sometimes complex. So that's your infinite plane. So there's our camera view. Let's put that into lit. So you can see Alex there. Let's grab our move tool. Let's make sure we're not in auto key. Let's just move him. Let's grab the armature. Let's just give him a bit of perspective there. He's not flat. And what we'll do, we'll grab our camera. We'll move that back. So if you move your camera and you can't see it move there, you just want to make sure you go to View, Cameras, Set Active camera. So there's our basic camera, which we'll tweak in a bit, but let's set up our lights. What we'll do, we'll set something up that's known as 3-point lighting. So with 3-point lighting, let's just use a colour for this plane. Let's add a material, new. Let's just go to plain material. Not 100% on the colour yet, but I like the idea of a purplish kind of colour for some reason. Kind of a bit of a purpley pink kind of colour, I don't know why, but. So there's our light there. Let's switch to an area light. Let's just make sure we're in cycles. Yep, we're in cycles. Light properties. There's our area light. Let's have the size as 5. And with 3-point lighting, you have the key light, the backlight. It's also known as a rim light and a fill light. And that's generally 3-point lighting, which is used a lot for lighting characters, for example. So what we'll do, we're looking at it from a top view. Let's move this to there. Remember Shift T, the little tip I said. So aim your light. Shift T. Aim it sort of at his face. Round about. You can always rotate it there as well. You haven't got to use Shift T. So that can be our first light. And that's known as your key light, that is. Your main light source. Your camera's there, facing your character. And what we'll do for that key light, we'll have it as slightly off-white. And let's try 3000 watt. Spread. This spread setting, if you set it to 1, it's hard at this angle really, but it only admits the shape of that light. So let's say you move that up to there. See, it's only casting the light shape, which was the rectangle. So that's your spread setting. So let's leave it at, let's just undo that so we're back to where we was. Spread, let's leave it at 180 for now. Default's decent. So that's our first key light. If we go to Shift D and hit enter, our next one is our fill light. And that generally goes the other side. It doesn't have to be exactly the same height. You can have it there. And that's aimed pretty much the character as well. Can help to have the beam slightly different. So that's your fill light. And it's usually not as powerful. So let's try 2000 for that. And let's just try a size of 8 there. And 10 there to give softer shadows. So. And this light cancels out the shadows. They kind of like cancel out each other. Shadows. Let's try 2,500. Like 3,250. So we've got our key, our fill. If we shift D again, move that to the back. We don't really want any shadows cast off this one. Yeah, be careful there on your lights. You're not scaling it, so you can scale it there. So what we'll do with this one, I think we'll make this a spotlight. Let's show the cone. And this backlight, as I say, also known as a rim light. Spot size. Try that as 0.4. And we'll have the colour on that. It's a coalish blue. Colour on this one, I like it. Yeah, off yellow. Make that one the same. Paste. So that's a key, fill and backlight. But our environment's a little bit small. So what we'll do, we'll scale this up. And we'll move this back. So we've set up our 3-point lighting. As I say, let's scale this a bit more. Let's go to shade smooth. That's it. Always got to remember that, right click and shade smooth. And we can move this back a bit. But we want it as a rim light. So it's not hitting the character there. Let's shift T. Have it. Sort of. We want the power quite low on this backlight. Maybe something like, let's try 150 for now. So once we've got them 3 lights set up, our key, fill and rim or backlight, our camera pointing with the character there. Let's hit F12. And let's just analyse that. It's a bit So the key light, remember, is coming from there. So we only really want to see the main shadow there. We don't want to see much shadow here. We want to try and get rid of that shadow. Try and get rid of that there. So we can just tweak the light settings now. So let's close that. Let's do a bit of light tweaking. So I think we'll bring this up a touch there. We'll try. I think we'll bring that down to 3000 actually. Make it a bit more white. Copy the hex value. Did I copy that correctly? Copy. Paste. Let's bring that up a bit. Let's increase this to 12 so we don't see as much shadow. Let's try 14. We won't see as much shadow there, will we then? Let's bring it back a bit to remove the shadow from that area. We want to see a little bit of a glow there. So let's rotate that. So he's hitting kind of like the side of his face there. So look at the power. Should we try 200? Let's hit F12. So we're in slot 1. Wrong one. The slot 1, that's got a bit of shadow there, but it's a bit too harsh. So let's go to slot 2. And let's increase that to 12. And let's move that back a bit. Rotate it a touch. This one, I think we'll move this back more. Background. Somewhere around there. Should we scale it a bit? Scale that background a bit. Let's hit F12. Let's compare them to so slot 1, slot 2. Still seem a bit harsh, don't they then? Down there. And we can't really see much of the rim light, can we, on him there? We create the 3 point. So I think we might need to bump that up to say 500. And let's rotate him round a little bit. Then move that light to there. $1,000. That's a bit too much. Let's try 600 watt. Let's have the radius as 1. Let's try 1. Rendering. Let's go to slot 3. Let's F12. Let's compare that with 2. You start seeing a little bit of a... Not enough though, is it? What about if we bring that closer? If we bring it closer, we can see the rim more, can't we now? Rotate that a touch. F12. So you're getting a little bit of rim lighting from the back. Let's try 1,000. F12. That sounds better, doesn't it? We've got a key light there, fill there, and we're getting a bit of rim lighting here in the spotlight. 1,500. So we've got a bit of a there, light there. Creates a bit more visual interest. We're having a bit of rim lighting on there. What we could do as an extra step as well is we've got our sword. If we go to material, sword light, emission, put the strength as 1. Go to rendering, choose slot 4, press F12. Compare it with 3. Now we've got a little bit of light from the sword. It's in his arm there to create a little bit more interest. So with that, I think we'll bump that. We'll have that emission as a coalish blue. We'll go to our render. Cycles, GPU, max samples. Yeah. Denoise. Yeah. Just min samples. Say 128. F12. Should have kept it a square instead of kept scrolling out, but I'm going to put this on Instagram eventually. And what we could do is we could go to our materials, have the strength as 1 keys, the 25 have the strength as 5 key, go to 50, paste, copy, paste, delete that one. Then we've got the sword kind of pulsing. So if you just go to full lighting, we'll stick to material in that one. So that's a very basic 3-point lighting setup, that is. And obviously I've been naughty there, you want to name these to rim light, key light, fill. And it's just a case of tweaking things to your satisfaction, really. Play more to get the shadows, less or more, less harsh. It's a touch too harsh at the back. So let's maybe bump that up to 14. Let's reduce the harshness there. Not much of a shadow there, a bit of an infant background there. Bit of a gradient. He's waving. You got a bit of a pulsation on the sword. So let's just choose a random frame where he's waving. He's got his hand up there. Let's just hit F12. And there's your basic 3-point lighting. Seems a touch. Seems not quite bright enough there. It's a little bit dull. So what we can do, let's just increase that to 3,500. Increase that to 3. And if we go to shading, world, let's just try that as 1.2 out of interest. And that's added a bit more light, hasn't it? There's a little bit of rim light there, a bit of light from your emission there, some shadows, bit of gradient. So that's a basic lighting. Basic 3-point lighting tutorial. I haven't gone in depth with anything, but that gives you an idea of how you go about lighting. So, just a few little final tips for you, which I've put in the PDF actually, but We've said that that's the infinite background that you use. If you go into wireframe, you just have a bevel there. We've said that's our viewport shading, so you can see the lighting kind of like in all its glory, which we've got in there. Scene scale. Always remember about scale. If you're lighting somewhere bigger, you want more power. Your world shader, increase your strength there. And then the layout. So you've got your lighting on this side, your 3D viewport this side, and your timeline, for example. You can use more than one monitor, it's helpful, but I prefer just the one monitor these days. I used to use it for years, 2 monitors, but just on the one monitor. So that's the basic principles and concepts of lighting. We've covered a lot of stuff here. It's a complex subject. So make sure you download that PDF, and that gives you an intro into how you go about lighting your scenes. So in the next lesson, we're going to start putting everything we've learnt in these 9 lessons to use as we model, rig, animate, light, render a cop and robber scene. So I'm just getting everything in place now, ready to go. So that'll be the next lesson, lesson 10. So there you go, that was lesson 9, lighting and rendering. Cheers guys, I'll see you on the next one. God bless.